Lyra moved before the last word left her older self's mouth. She caught Corin by the back of his coat and hurled him toward the stairwell. The shadow creature flowed after them, too large for its shape and too fluid for its bones, ember blue eyes opening along folds that had not existed a heartbeat before. Its foremost gaze remained fixed on Corin's throat. Lyra stepped between them and slashed her blade through empty air. The thing recoiled anyway, remembering a wound she had not yet given it. Down, she snapped. Corin obeyed. Behind them, boots struck the adjoining roofs in disciplined rhythm. The gray men were already converging, their ash-colored coats almost invisible in the rain. In Lyra's first life, those patrols had swept east toward Belfounder Square after the midnight horn. Tonight she had saved Corin 3 days before he was meant to survive on his own, and the patrol was coming west. She forced herself to trust what had not changed. 3 flights down, through a laundry room rank with lye, then out the rear window above Tallow Lane. Corin landed badly in the alley, biting back a cry as his ankle turned. Lyra dropped beside him. The creature came through the brick wall without breaking it, unfolding from the mortar-like darkness, remembering it had teeth. "Can you run?" Corin's face had gone gray. "Can that?" A whistle shrilled at the mouth of the lane. Lyra shoved him forward. They cut between leaning tenements while rainwater raced black around their boots. She counted intersections by smell: tannery rot, lamp oil, hot iron, then the sweet decay of the abandoned orchards behind St. Ara's Hospice. At the 4th crossing she stopped them beneath a sagging balcony. A gray patrol passed ahead exactly when she expected, except there were 6 men instead of 4, and one carried a brass cage filled with white fire. The creature's eyes widened toward it. The alley vanished. For one breath Lyra stood beneath the red sky. Her own body lay against the palace gate, older, thinner, one arm burned to bone. Snow settled in her open mouth. Corin knelt nearby with a sword through his spine, and beyond him the city folded inward without sound. Then the dead Lyra's eyes turned toward the living one. "You brought it home," the corpse whispered. The vision hardened around her. She smelled scorched hair. Felt blood cooling beneath her ribs. Corin's hand closed on her shoulder, but his voice came from impossibly far away. The shadow creature pressed close, every ember blue eye reflecting her death. It was not merely showing her a memory. It was feeding the future enough substance to make it real. Lyra drove her scarred shoulder into the wall. Pain broke the echo. "Warehouse," she gasped, pointing across the alley. "Green door." They slipped inside as the caged fire swept around the corner. The derelict warehouse held collapsed shelves, mold-black grain sacks, and rusted hooks hanging from ceiling rails. Lyra pulled Corin behind a stack of rotting crates, then faced the creature. It filled the aisle now, limbs branching from limbs, its outline shivering toward every place she might flee. The binding phrase surfaced from the final winter of her first life, spoken then by a dying priest whose name she had never learned. Lyra raised her bare palm. "By the wound before the wound, where one shadow and answer none." The creature folded violently. Its eyes extinguished one by one until only 2 remained, low and watchful beneath a torn canvas sheet. Fire seared across Lyra's palm. A black sigil burned into her flesh, and the warehouse flickered out of sight. For 3 heartbeats she saw only falling snow and her own corpse smiling at the gate. Then Corin caught her before she fell. They left by the river door and reached the rendezvous cellar beneath the shuttered apothecary. Lyra gave the coded knock. The door drifted open beneath her hand. Her contact sat upright at the table, throat bruised, eyes filmed silver. He smiled when he saw her, though the man she remembered had never smiled. "Lyra Voss," he said, as bolts slammed shut behind them. "You came earlier than they promised." The last bolt settled with a sound like a bone driven back into its socket. Corin spun toward the door, but Lyra watched the man beneath the hanging lamp. Silver filmed his eyes from edge to edge. The bruises around his throat were not finger marks. They formed a broken ring, each dark crescent pressed at the same depth as the sigil burned into her palm. "Who promised you?" she asked. His mouth opened. The thing inside Lyra's shadow pulled hard enough to bend her knees. Cold raced up her wrist, and the cellar stretched around her, brick walls thinning into black corridors crowded with doors that had not yet been built. Behind one waited the bell tower in flames. Behind another, rain fell upward over a square carpeted with bodies. The man smiled then, an expression so wrong on Bran's face that Lyra's stomach clenched and silver spilled from his eyes like molten wire. She struck her marked palm against the floor. "By the path refused, I named the debt between us." The words came from a winter 9 years ahead, from a ritual she had watched kill 3 binders before the 4th discovered its flaw. In that lost future, the phrase had been spoken over a circle of salt and saint bone. Here she had damp stone, her own blood, and no time. She dragged 2 fingers through the grime, completing the sigil with a crooked line. The shadow burst outward. Corin shouted as it climbed the walls, antler-thin limbs unfolding from darkness, its eyeless head turning toward Lyra as though scenting her heartbeat. "Not my blood," she whispered through locked teeth. "My consequence." The creature convulsed. A seam opened along its face, then another. Eyes blossomed within them, small, wet, and colorless. It drank from the air around her, and Lyra felt each altered choice answer. Corin breathing when he should have died, the patrol turning east, the rendezvous reached before midnight. The changed thread fed it better than flesh. Its shoulders broadened. New joints cracked into place. One long hand pressed against the ceiling, leaving frost across the bricks. Then the bond tightened, and clarity knifed through her. She saw black water pouring from the sealed cistern beneath St. Ara's infirmary. She saw patients rise with silver eyes. She saw the western ward gates chained from the outside while something rang the plague bell 3 times. At the center stood a child in a red scarf, holding the key Lyra had buried in another life. The vision lasted a breath, but its certainty remained lodged behind her ribs. A rasp came from beneath the table. Bran jerked awake where he had fallen, one hand clawing at his bruised throat. The silver was receding from his eyes, leaving them bloodshot and terrified. He saw the creature crouched above Lyra, saw its many eyes close one after another, and reached for the knife hidden in his boot. "What did you bring here?" "A gutter wraith," Lyra said. The lie tasted of rust. "It followed us from the tannery ruins. I caught it before it could root itself in you." Bran's gaze dropped to her palm. Recognition hardened his face before fear could soften it. He had smuggled relics for the Ash Covenant, he knew a binding scar from a warding burn. Corin looked between them, waiting for Lyra to explain, but she curled her fingers over the sigil. Bran lowered his knife without sheathing it. The trust in the cellar did not break loudly. It thinned, thread by thread, until every breath seemed capable of snapping it. The creature strained toward that fracture, feeding on possibilities. Lyra seized the bond and forced it inward. Pain tore through her skull. She gave it the smallest thing she could surrender, a morning before the first catastrophe, sunlight on her mother's hands as they kneaded black bread, flour caught in the lines of her knuckles. The memory vanished so completely that Lyra could no longer remember whether her mother had ever sung. The shadow shrank with a furious hiss, folding beneath Lyra's boots until only a many-eyed stain remained inside the circle. She rose unsteadily. "St. Ara's infirmary," she said. "The cistern beneath it. We move now, before the plague bell rings." Rain blazed the infirmary steps, turning St. Ara's white stone the color of old bone. Lyra climbed past the coughing pour without slowing. Beneath the street, the bound creature pulled against her sigil scar, not with hunger alone but direction. Its awareness spread through the city's changed threads, tasting each disturbance. One burned brighter than the poison cistern, lamp oil, resin, and a bell waiting to strike noon. "Market Square," she said. Bran caught her elbow. "The cistern is inside. The water kills dozens. The fire kills thousands." His grip tightened, demanding the explanation she could not give. Then the creature stirred, and a child's borrowed whisper slipped through Lyra's thoughts. Too late. Red awnings. Run. She tore free and plunged back into the rain. The square lay 6 streets downhill, crowded beneath dyed canvas and smoking braziers. In Lyra's first life, the Great Fire had begun with an overturned lamp at noon. Everyone had called it an accident. Only years later had she learned about the resin painted beneath the awnings and the chained western gates. Today, 3 men in dockworkers' coats stood exactly where memory placed them, except a 4th waited beside the bell tower, his eyes shining silver. The creature tasted the changed thread through her scar. Lyra felt the anchor event unfold as pressure rather than vision, a lamp tipping, a fuse catching beneath a spice cart, panic driven west toward locked iron. She counted the bellkeeper's breaths. 7. 6. At 3, she shouldered through a basket cellar, seized a butcher's cleaver, and hurled it. The blade struck the bell rope. The bell sounded early. Its single bronze concussion rolled across the square. One conspirator flinched and dropped his taper before the lamp had spilled. Lyra kicked the oil jar into a rain gutter, then overturned the spice cart onto the hidden fuse. Wet saffron and mud smothered the spark. Bran barreled into another man. The silver-eyed watcher fled beneath the awnings while merchants shouted and guards forced their way into the confusion. For one suspended heartbeat, Lyra smelled no burning flesh. Then someone screamed her name. Captain Soren Vale stood at the western gate, younger than the commander who had once dragged Lyra from a field of corpses, but unmistakable in his grey cloak. In the first history, she had not met him for 6 more years. Now 2 conspirators had him pinned against the bars, one twisting his sword arm while the other pressed a hooked knife beneath his jaw. Lyra moved before caution could stop her. She drove her shoulder into the knifeman, felt ribs yield, and slashed with the fallen cleaver. Soren broke loose, but the silver-eyed watcher reappeared behind her. His short blade opened her side from hip to rib. Heat flooded under her coat. Lyra staggered, clamping one hand over the gash. The watcher leaned close enough for her to see pale light swimming across his pupils. "You saved the square," he murmured. So the debt moved. Bran's shout drove him back. The conspirators scattered into separate alleys, dragging Soren with them before Lyra could cross the blood-slick stones. She followed anyway, leaving red drops in the rain. Each breath pulled the wound wider. Beneath her scar, the creature fed on the violent branching of futures, swelling inside its binding until cellar chains snapped in her mind. Its voice returned as a chorus. A baker who had burned behind his shutters. A girl trampled at the western gate. An old man who had died carrying water in a cracked blue bowl. Saved lives spoke through one throat, overlapping in terrified gratitude. Not here. East. They took him east. Lyra reached the alley mouth and found a black sword wrapped in oilcloth where no weapon had lain in the first history. She stripped it bare. Future-forged steel drank the rain without reflecting it, and her scar answered with a pulse of recognition. Beyond the rooftops, darkness crawled toward the eastern quarters, spreading chimney by chimney as Lyra gripped the impossible blade and followed Soren's captors into it. The eastward alleys narrowed until the dark seemed to have weight. It clung beneath balconies and pulled around Lyra's boots, swallowing the moonlight before it touched the stones. Every stride pulled at the gash beneath her ribs. Warm blood soaked her bandage, cooled, then warmed again. Ahead, the creature moved without sound, its altered body shivering whenever a stolen voice stirred inside it. Bran found the first mark beneath an iron drainpipe, a circle crossed by 3 descending cuts. Fresh chalk dust silvered his thumb. That was not here yesterday. It was never here, Lyra whispered. Corin's gaze sharpened. You remember every wall in the city? Only the ones where people died. A woman's scream broke off somewhere ahead. Lyra ran before either man could stop her. The black sword dragged cold through her grip, heavier near each patch of living shadow. They burst into a dyer's court where vats stood like open graves. Three masked captors were hauling Soren toward a covered passage, but a fourth figure waited above them on a tiled roof. Silver Eyes watched from beneath a bone-white hood. The hooded watcher raised two fingers. Now! The nearest vat erupted. Scalding indigo dye crashed across the court exactly where Lyra would have entered in the future she remembered. She twisted aside before the chain snapped, dragging Bran with her. The watcher did not flinch at her escape. "You knew," Lyra said. "So did you." A shutter banged open above the passage. A boy leaned out, coughing in the dye fumes. Lyra knew his narrow face. Tavin Marrow, dead at 14 during the ash winter, his body found beneath the east granary with 2 stolen loaves against his chest. She had walked past him then because soldiers were hunting her. She had remembered his frozen fingers for 16 years. The watcher sliced a cord. The roof beam above Tavin sagged. "Take Vale," Corin shouted. "The boy is bait." He was right. Saving Tavin meant crossing the open court, revealing that she had recognized a death not yet written. It meant giving Soren's captors the passage and perhaps losing the man who would one day hold the northern wall. Lyra sheathed secrecy with the sword and ran. An arrow struck sparks from the stones beside her. Another cut through her sleeve. She reached the wall as the beam fell, caught Tavin around the waist, and threw them both into an empty vat. Timbers shattered across the rim. Pain tore through her wound so violently that the court went white. Above her, the watcher laughed once. "There you are, Lyra Voss." Her name stopped her breath. The creature sprang onto the fallen beam. Darkness opened along its spine like a second mouth. The voices inside it rose together, not screaming now, but speaking fragments of choices that had never happened. Left passage. Broken stair. Soren alive beneath the bells. Then its body flattened into shadow and flowed across the stones, climbing walls without flesh or weight. Wherever it passed, the captors' shadows peeled from their feet and seized their ankles. Bran charged. Corin followed a heartbeat later, swearing as his blade met a hooked knife. Lyra pulled Tavin from the vat and pushed him toward the western arch run to the market guard. "They'll arrest me. Tell them Lyra Voss sent you." The words escaped before she understood their cost. Tavin stared, then fled. The watcher retreated across the roof. Lyra pursued through the covered passage while the creature's borrowed voices guided her around traps laid for decisions she had not yet made. Someone had studied her corrections. Someone knew where mercy would pull her and where memory would make her reckless. She reached the bell stair in time to see Soren chained beneath the old bronze counterweight. The watcher stood above him, hand resting on a lever carved with the same sigil burned into Lyra's scar. "You saved the square," the watcher said. "So the fire had to go somewhere." He pulled the lever. Far behind them, the early bell Lyra had rung groaned a second time. Beneath the city, ancient gears engaged out of sequence. The eastern granary split open with a thunderous crack, and a tower of black flame surged into the sky, the ash winter beginning years before its time. Darkness raced beneath the stairwell door in branching veins, filling the mortar with a wet black gleam. Lyra shoved Tavin toward Soren and closed both hands around the new sword. The blade answered with a pulse that traveled through her wounded shoulder and sank cold teeth into her spine. Below them, bells began ringing without hands, one note from each tower, descending through the city like footsteps into a grave. "The granary," Soren rasped, dragging his chain. "If the lower bins catch, the fire crosses the grain bridges." Lyra remembered those bridges collapsing in the ash winter, but not until the 7th night. Thousands had crowded the eastern wards by then, desperate for bread. Tonight the alleys were still open. The watch had not sealed the gates. A smaller death, perhaps, if she moved now. Yet the watcher had chosen this moment because she would move. He was building his future from her corrections. Bran and Corin burst through the upper landing, coughing soot. Bran's beard was singed down one side. Corin carried a broken halberd and stared once at the black veins before refusing to look again.
North bin is burning, Bran said. Oil in the chutes. Someone planned it.
Break the grain bridges, Lyra ordered.
Corin recoiled. That feeds half the eastern ward.
It feeds the fire first.
Disbelief hardened his face.
In her first life, Corin had trusted her until the siege of St. Ara, when her retreat order left his sister beyond the wall. That betrayal had not happened yet, but its shadow lived inside her voice.
You knew, he said. You knew this was coming. Lyra could have lied.
Instead, she struck Sorin's chain with the new sword. Blue-white light cracked across the links, and something inside her skull tore loose. For one breath she stood in summer sunlight beside a river, hearing her mother sing while washing blood from a child's dress. Then the memory folded inward and vanished.
Lyra remembered having a mother.
She could no longer remember her face.
The chain fell.
The bound creature shrieked beneath the stairs, and every stolen voice inside it shrieked with her.
Its limbs lengthened against the iron bands. Silver eyes opened along its throat, blinking in sequence.
It had tasted the memory through the sword.
Go, Lyra gasped.
They descended into smoke thick enough to chew. At the granary court, burning oil poured from the north tower and crawled across spilled grain in luminous streams. Workers battered uselessly at barred doors. Behind them, Magistrate Vale hung from the weighhouse balcony by one hand, his other arm pinned beneath a fallen beam. In Lyra's first life, his execution 3 months later had broken the council and given the Ash Choir the city. Saving him now could preserve the chain of command or place a living weapon in the Watcher's hands. She cut the bridge supports anyway. The first chain snapped with a sound like thunder.
Corin severed the second while Bran dragged Vale free.
The grain bridge tilted, shedding burning wheat into the canal, then collapsed between the north bins and the crowded eastern stores.
Steam exploded upward.
The fire lost its path. A cheer rose, brief and ragged.
Then Vale saw Lyra's sword and went still.
I watched that blade buried with you, he whispered.
No one moved.
Even the fire seemed to lower its voice. From the smoke behind Lyra came her mother's forgotten song, sung in Lyra's own older, ruined voice. The bound creature crawled into the court, iron bands hanging from its widened body. Between its silver eyes, a woman's face pressed outward beneath the skin it scarred, exhausted, unmistakably hers.
The mouth opened.
Don't let Vale reach dawn, her future self said, as the magistrate drew a hidden knife behind Bran's back.
Lyra moved before the warning finished.
She caught Vale's wrist as the knife cleared his sleeve and drove it into the balcony rail.
The blade rang against iron.
Bran lurched away, one hand flying to his neck, while Corin swung the broken halberd between them.
Vale did not struggle.
His gaze remained fixed on the face bulging from the creature's throat.
That thing lies, he said.
Blood welled around Lyra's fingers.
Not Vale's.
The hidden knife had opened her palm, and the black veins beneath her skin turned toward the cut like roots seeking rain. The sword answered with a pulse of blue-white hunger.
Vale saw it. You're infected. So are your orders. Lyra twisted his arm until the knife fell. Who gave you the signal to bar the workers inside?
I gave no such order.
A beam cracked in the north bin. Sparks spiraled over the canal, bright as a swarm of insects.
The severed bridge had stopped the main fire, but flaming grain already clogged the water gates below. If the wheel seized, the canal would rise beneath the eastern stores and carry oil through every cellar drain. Sorin staggered into the court, clutching his freed wrist. The bells, he rasped.
They're not warning the city. They're counting.
The next tower sounded. At once, every barred granary door slammed inward.
Workers spilled into the court, coughing and half-blind. 3 fell without wounds. Silver eyes opened beneath their tongues.
The rest recoiled, But the fallen workers rose on bent limbs and seized whoever stood nearest.
Corin buried the halberd point in one man's shoulder. No blood came.
A child's voice laughed from inside the wound.
Lower gates. Lyra shouted. Open the canal before it backs into the drains. Bran dragged Vale toward the wheelhouse.
Corin hesitated, looking from Lyra to the crawling creature wearing her future face.
You heard what it said.
I heard it save you. You heard it tell you to murder a magistrate.
Vale stumbled but did not deny the accusation.
That frightened Lyra more than outrage would have. The creature lunged. Soren threw himself into its path. Its elongated hand closed around his chest, silver eyes fluttering along its throat as stolen voices poured from its mouth. His wife begged him to come home. His dead brother accused him of cowardice. Then his own voice whispered the secret he had never confessed.
Soren froze. Lyra slashed through the creature's wrist. The sword drank something warm and irreplaceable.
A winter room vanished from her mind, the smell of cedar smoke, a small hand in hers, someone promising that morning would come. She could not remember whose hand it had been. The severed limb struck the stones and became a knot of black-veined grain. The creature's future Lyra face screamed. Every cut teaches him. Across the court, Vale broke Bran's grip and ran, not toward the outer gate, but into the wheelhouse.
Stop him! Lyra shouted. Bran followed. Corin hauled Soren upright. Lyra pursued them as another bell sounded below the city, impossibly deep, its note trembling through the foundations.
Inside the wheelhouse, the great canal mechanism turned backward.
Vale stood at the control lever, both hands locked around it.
Bran lay at his feet, stunned by a blow to the temple. Black oil climbed the spokes against gravity, threading itself through the gears.
I didn't do this, Vale said. Terror stripped the authority from his voice. My hands won't release. Lyra seized his shoulders. Beneath his collar, silver letters moved under his skin. Dawn is a door.
The sword urged her to strike. She felt the promise inside it, one clean cut, another surrendered memory, and Vale's corruption would end. Perhaps Vale with it. Behind them, the creature scraped through the doorway while Corin and Soren fought to hold it back.
What happens at dawn? Lyra demanded. Vale's jaw clenched until a tooth cracked. The census.
The word struck harder than the bells.
At dawn, every household in the eastern wards would open its door to the magistrate's clerks.
Names, births, deaths, guests, every living soul counted and entered into the city ledger. In her first life, the census had passed without incident. Or she had forgotten what it cost.
Lyra drove the sword into the gear housing instead of Vale. Blue-white light flooded the wheelhouse. The black oil ignited without heat.
The gears screamed and stopped, but the shock flung Lyra against the wall. Something tore from her again. She searched for her mother's song and found only silence. Then even the knowledge that there had been a song began to fade. Vale collapsed, hands released. Outside, water thundered through the opened lower gates. The burning grain surged into the canal and vanished beneath the city. For one heartbeat, the danger receded. Then hundreds of voices began singing below the floor. The creature went still. Its many eyes turned downward. Soren stared through the wheelhouse grating as pale shapes rose beneath the rushing black water, faces packed side by side, mouths moving in perfect unison. Vale crawled away from the lever. Those are the uncounted. The final bell rang. Every silver letter under his skin flared white, and somewhere beyond the smoke, thousands of door latches lifted at once. Lyra's future face smiled from the creature's throat. You saved the granary, it whispered. Now he knows exactly where the city will gather.